Hi, I'm Susan here at the Ogden Nature Center, flipping through the Archie comic books of my childhood. And I'm looking in the back for that advertisement. You know, the one where they let you buy sea monkeys? My mom would never let me order the sea monkeys. And now here I live next to the shores of the Great Salt Lake, where those sea monkeys actually came from. And now I feel kind of bad. I don't really want to order them to live at my house. Stick with me today for Wild Wednesday. We're going to learn some facts and lore and legends of the Great Salt Lake. So the Great Salt Lake is, as suggested by its name, a salty lake. It's a really salty lake. If you compare the Great Salt Lake to the oceans are about 3.5% salinity, and the Great Salt Lake is somewhere between 6 and 30%, depending on where you are on the lake. So that is a lot of salt. Now, the lake itself has all this salt in it because it's what we call a terminal lake, which means the rivers that flow into it, there are 3 that flow into it, they terminate there. That water does not outflow at all. It doesn't go anywhere else. It goes into that basin where the Great Salt Lake is, and it evaporates. And as it evaporates, it leaves all those salts and minerals behind. So if there's less fresh water going in, that lake's going to get even saltier. So as it evaporates, it's going to continue to be really salty. Now, this salt water makes it really easy to float. If you've ever gone out swimming in the Great Salt Lake, you know that. You can float easier in the ocean than you can, say, in Bear Lake, and you can float easier at the Great Salt Lake than you can in the ocean, because all of that salt makes the water very dense, and dense water will actually lift you up higher. Makes sense? You don't sink down in as far. Now, there are times when you go to the Great Salt Lake, you might see that the water looks pink in certain areas at the north end. And that actually is because of a man-made structure that we built across the center of the lake years and years and years ago for the Union Pacific Railroad. The railroad trains couldn't keep going all the way around the top of the lake. It was a hard journey. It was a canyon. There were a lot of hills, and it was just a very difficult journey. So they built this causeway to go straight across the center of the lake, and that has now divided the lake in half. And that causeway kind of inhibits some of the fresh water flow into the north end. So that's where these little microbes live that go, hey, we've got some really salty water up here, and we like that. And that's what they eat. And their bodies are pinkish red, and so there's so many of them out there chowing down on the bacteria and stuff in that lake that makes the water look pink. So although the Great Salt Lake is considered a very large lake by our standards, it's actually a mere puddle of what it used to be. It used to be part of Lake Bonneville, and Lake Bonneville was one of the bodies of water that covered Utah, or what we call Utah, during its geologic history. Utah was covered with water actually quite a few times. It had a Paleo-ocean, it had another lake on top of it, Lake Flagstaff, and then later on, Lake Bonneville formed during the last ice age some 30,000 years ago. So about 17,000 years ago, a crazy thing happened. Lake Bonneville started to overflow, and it overflowed at Red Rock Pass in Idaho. That's about 30 miles north of the Utah-Idaho border. This flood lasted a year. Can you imagine? This thing flooded a year, and over the next several thousand years, as that flood water lowered the level of Lake Bonneville, the Great Salt Lake started to form, and it would lose water and then it would stabilize, and then it would lose more water and then it would stabilize, until about 10,000 years ago we got the Great Salt Lake that we kind of recognize today. But you can still see a remnant of Lake Bonneville. It's our Bonneville shoreline. Some of you even hike on the old shoreline of Lake Bonneville, right up there along the back of our city, along the Wasatch Front. And it's called the Bonneville Shoreline Trail because that is the old shoreline for the Lake Bonneville from the Ice Age. Now, the cool thing about it, you think about this and you think, well, there's nothing in this lake. It's really kind of dead. And you'd be right in comparing it to a lot of other kinds of lakes. But this lake has something that's really, really cool. It has something called brine shrimp and brine flies. And these creatures, although they are very, very tiny, there are millions of them. And they are a very important food source to birds, both those that nest on the Great Salt Lake or around it, or those that migrate through. Some 10 million birds a year pass through the Great Salt Lake ecosystem and dine on these brine flies and these brine shrimp. There's almost 320 some species have been noted at the Great Salt Lake. It is an incredible resource for these birds. Now, these brine shrimp, the sea monkeys that I was talking about earlier at the back of the comic books when I was growing up, they were actually brine shrimp out of the Great Salt Lake. And brine shrimp start out as these little bitty cysts. This is a tube full of brine shrimp cysts. I can't even begin to think about how many thousands of brine shrimp could be in here. And the cool thing about these cysts, and we call them cysts and not eggs, is these cysts can actually lay dormant for years and years and years and years. Even if there's no water, they can still be in the soil there years and years, and then when there is water, these things can hatch out, and then we have brine shrimp, which is a pretty amazing thing. Now, there's actually some pretty cool legends about the Great Salt Lake, and there's one about the Great Salt Lake monster. Have you ever seen a monster out there? I've gone looking. I've never seen the monster. But it turns out that at dusk, one evening back in 1877, in early summer, there was a group of employees up there. It was called the Barnes & Company Salt Company. And they were actually extracting salt, like we still do today, out of the Great Salt Lake. It's not the kind we eat. It's the kind we use on roads and stuff. But they were actually there out working, and they swore they saw a monster. They said it had the body of an alligator and the head of a horse, and it came running at them in a bellowing rage, and they all headed up for the hills and headed into the brush and hid there overnight from this monster. Years later, somebody said they thought it actually was probably a buffalo that was charging them at dusk, and it probably just kind of freaked them out, because if you've ever been out there when it's very eerily quiet, it can be kind of scary. My name is Susan. I'm glad you joined me today for this tale about the Great Salt Lake. Please come on out to the Ogden Nature Center and see us. We are open from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturdays, and starting in June, we are free on Saturday.